Hey guys, Sean from Invest to Live here. So today, let's talk about 1%. The 1% rule when it comes to rental properties. First, before we jump in, always speak with a licensed and registered financial advisor for decisions that involve your money. If you're looking at real estate, make sure you're talking to an agent or a realtor. Make sure they have a license too and that they know what they're talking about. So let's jump on in. What is the 1% rule in regards to rental real estate? Well, it's really simple. We want to try to get as close as possible to having 1% of the overall cost of the property represent 1 month's rent payment. So simple terms, if you're paying $100,000 for a rental property, you want to expect about $1,000 a month in rent payment. Seems pretty simple, right? Not a bad rule, sort of works out from the financial perspective, just a good sort of rule to go by. Here's the thing though, it's not really that simple sometimes. Depending on where you're looking, that rule can be wildly impossible to hit or maybe not even high enough. So I'll give you an example. If you're buying in an area that is particularly run down or has maybe higher crime rates or sort of just a lower class property, that 1% rule might not give you enough breathing room to cover for vacancies, cover for capital expenditures and maintenance, unforeseen things that could happen, long periods of time without getting someone in there. So a lot of times that 1% rule really isn't enough in that kind of a situation. That might be a case where you have to find something closer to like a 2% rate where you're paying $50,000 for a property, but you need to still get that $1,000 a month. Now, if you're thinking there's absolutely no way, no how I can find a $50,000 property and get $1,000 a month, well, it might be kind of difficult in some areas, especially along the coasts and major cities. But there are a lot of areas in the Midwest, Cleveland being one of them, certainly several others as well, excuse me, where you can hit that 2% rule and you leverage things such as a Section 8 payment or voucher where the state is actually helping support those tenants to pay that rent. You'll be able to get near that 2% rule. Now, let's be clear. Doesn't mean you should, doesn't mean it's a good investment, but if you understand the risks and the rewards of what you're doing there, certainly something to think about. Now, let's flip to the total other side of this as well. A 1% rule might work in a lot of those areas I mentioned, but here's the flip side. Those really expensive major cities, the MSAs, the coasts, you might be lucky to get $1,000 for $200,000 property or even less. So here we might be talking about getting half a point on a property. Now you might say, well, what the heck would I do this for? That might not even cover my bills. Absolutely true yet again. So the reason we think about this from that perspective is really simple. When we're thinking then about where that 1% rule fits in, it depends on balancing expectations of having capital appreciation of that underlying asset and not. So if you're buying a property in a major city in California, say, or New York or Boston, you're going to pay a lot for that and typically not see anything close to that 1% rule. But you're going to hope that via speculation and increasing that underlying property value, that's where you'll get your return from. So that's sort of where we go from the standpoint of like, why do we have 1% rule? How does it guide us towards our decision making? Yes, some places you really got to focus more on the 2% rule. Other focus areas are going to be more about like, can we get some forced appreciation or value increase from the underlying property? Now let's talk about 1% rule the way that I see it, because I think that those are really just rules and not really a real world application for it. So here's sort of my take on this and actually how I actually do this in practice with my real rental properties. I find that hitting that rule is difficult for me because I want to buy in areas that are going to be safe for the people who live there. I tend to really make sure I do a good job of ensuring the properties are safe, very well taken care of. We rehab them as much as possible. And really, when I say as much as possible, I mean up to the standards of exactly what I think they should be every time we rent them out. So we're willing to spend a little bit more money to provide a safe, nice area in a good community, try to get near good schools, make sure there's lots of places around for work. So we're willing to look a little bit below that 1% rule. I come in somewhere around 0.8 to 0.9, or thereabouts. And the goal for me is I want to make sure that I'm getting these properties rented for as long as time as possible, because turnover is where you lose your money, right? There's no one is in there paying rent. You are just simply flat out losing money. So for me, I take the risk off of that 1%. I make sure my rents are right on par with everyone else in the area and then a little bit less so that my results show up before theirs when they're looking. I'm very careful about tenant placement so that that 1% rule doesn't expose me to having issues down the road that I'm not prepared for. And a big piece of this as well is I'm okay with having it be a little bit less, because what I also recognize is over the course of maybe 2, 3, 4 years, just the natural inflation rate of rent and home prices in general in the US, and that's where I'm mostly talking about here is in the US, we're going to see those rents increase, maybe only a little bit, but that little bit is going to keep going up, but the price you paid stays static forever. So as money becomes cheaper and worth less, and you get that inflationary pressure on the rent, but also on the underlying asset, that's where I tend to find sort of that vertex of hitting a point where I'm doing really well there. So just a quick one today. The 1% rule is really popular. I hear it all the time. People tend to say, I have to have it or it's not going to work. Think about it. Don't let good opportunities pass you by because you're slightly off of a rule. And don't stick to a rule that doesn't make sense based on the area you're buying in, right? Always consider those factors like lack of appreciation and maybe more problematic. You need more rent to help cover those issues. Huge amounts of speculation and lots of underlying asset growth. You're not going to get the rent you want because people could just buy a property instead of renting from you. So my suggestion is figure out what works for you. Think about the long-term perspective of what you're going to get from that property, the way you value it, and make sure you have enough to cover all of those things like vacancies, maintenance, taxes, insurance, all these things that matter, capital expenditures. And that's the goal. I'm going to say this again. I definitely don't do a good job saying at the beginning of my video, so I try to remember at the end. Please hit the like button if you haven't already and you think there's some value here. And please consider subscribing. We have lots of great content we put out on a pretty regular basis. So thanks so much for listening. In a nutshell, the 1% rule is great as an underlying indicator of what you might want to look at or sort properties by, but don't let it be the thing that stops you from missing a good deal or taking on a really bad deal. So thanks so much. Good talking to everybody, and let's keep investing. Thanks.